When people ask me why I keep my family at arm's length, I usually laugh it off with something like, "Oh, you know, we're just not that close." But the truth? The truth is uglier than I usually let slip. My story doesn't start with some massive betrayal, like one giant explosion that destroyed everything. It was more like a slow drip of acid, eating away at me piece by piece until there wasn't much left of the family bond people keep telling me I should value. I grew up with one brother. Let's call him Tyler. He was the golden child from day one. My parents weren't rich, but they bent over backwards to make sure Tyler never had to face consequences for anything. If he failed a class, it was the teacher's fault. If he got caught lying, it was he's just going through a phase. And if I even so much as breathed wrong, it was, why can't you be more like your brother? I learned early on that my job in the family wasn't to be loved, it was to survive. When I was 15, my parents opened a savings account for college. They'd tell people at church, at family barbecues, even at my school open houses, we're putting money aside for her education. She's so bright. I believed them. I actually let myself imagine I had a safety net. I took advanced classes, joined clubs, worked part-time. I thought maybe, for once, I'd be the one who made them proud. Then came the night Tyler crashed his car. He'd been drinking with friends, trying to show off, and he wrapped his old Honda around a tree. By some miracle, no one was killed. He walked away with a broken arm. My parents cried like he'd just returned from war. They kept saying, he needs a fresh start. And that's when I overheard them. We'll use her college fund. I remember standing in the hallway, frozen. Her college fund. My college fund. It didn't even sound real. I confronted them later, thinking maybe I'd misunderstood, and my mom just sighed like I was being dramatic. He needs a new car, honey. You'll survive without college. You're independent. Independent. That word was like a knife. I wanted to scream, but instead I went numb. Fast forward a year. Tyler got arrested for DUI. My parents were hysterical, crying about how the system was out to ruin good boys. They didn't have bail money, so guess what they did? They sold my laptop. The one I'd saved for with 2 summers of babysitting and tutoring kids in my neighborhood. I walked into my room, and it was gone. My dad had the audacity to look me in the eye and say, "Family comes first." I wish I could tell you I exploded right then, but I didn't. I swallowed it down, again, because by then I'd learned the hard way that in my family, my anger wasn't valid. My pain was just background noise. I scraped my way into college anyway. I worked insane hours, took out loans, lived off ramen and peanut butter. Every time I called home, it was the same story. Tyler's struggling. Can you send a little money? Or, you don't call enough, you're so difficult. When I got accepted into grad school, a program I killed myself to get into, I thought, just for a second, maybe they'd be proud. Instead, my mom laughed. She said, "Oh, probably some diversity handout. You always get lucky with those." It was like a slap across the face. I hung up before she could keep talking. I sat on my dorm bed with the acceptance letter in one hand and my phone in the other, shaking. I had worked harder than I thought was humanly possible, and my own mother dismissed it like it was nothing. But the worst moments weren't even the private ones. They loved humiliating me in public. At Christmas, they'd introduce me as our difficult child, while gushing over Tyler, our brilliant son. Family photos. Always just him. If I was in the shot, I'd mysteriously disappear before they posted it online. At first, I thought it was accidental, cropping, bad angles. But no. I caught my mom once, scrolling through, actually untagging me. And then, when I finally brought someone home, my partner, the first person who ever made me feel like maybe I wasn't impossible to love, they sneered. My dad said, "Only someone desperate would date you." I don't know what possessed me in that moment, but I smiled. Not a real smile, the kind that feels like breaking glass in your mouth. And I said, "Better desperate than blind." The silence after that was suffocating. My partner squeezed my hand under the table, and I knew in that instant, I wasn't crazy. I wasn't exaggerating. They really were that cruel. That was the last holiday I ever spent under their roof. Years later, when everything flipped and I found myself sitting across from them in a courtroom, their voices trembling as they begged me not to take everything from them. It all came rushing back. The car, the laptop, the insults, the names, the sneers. My mom's desperate cry, "Please, don't take everything from us." And I thought, you already took everything from me. But that's getting ahead of the story. After that last Christmas, I drew a line in the sand. I didn't storm out. Didn't make some dramatic speech about cutting ties. I just stopped showing up. No more holidays. No more phone calls unless they initiated. And even then, I kept my answers clipped and neutral, the kind of tone you use with a stranger you'll never see again. Of course, they noticed. My mom started sending guilt-laced texts. We're family. You don't just turn your back. My dad left voicemails that were basically lectures disguised as concern. You're being stubborn. You'll regret this one day. And Tyler? He didn't bother pretending. He sent me one message. Don't be jealous just because I'm the favorite. That was it. No punctuation, no explanation. Just pure smugness. That was the first time I realized he knew. He wasn't oblivious to how much they catered to him. He liked it. He basked in it. And me? I was just the control subject in their experiment on favoritism. I buried myself in grad school. It was hard as hell, but it was also liberating. For once, I wasn't the difficult child. I was just me, quiet, hardworking, and maybe a little cynical, but respected. I had professors who believed in me, friends who saw my worth without conditions. I learned what unconditional support felt like, and I swore I'd never go back to the version of me who begged my parents for scraps of approval. Meanwhile, Tyler spiraled. At first, it was just the usual: bar fights, parking tickets, jobs he quit within weeks. Then it got darker. A possession charge, an assault, DUIs piling up like unpaid bills. My parents spun every incident as bad luck or wrong place, wrong time. They drained what little savings they had left on lawyers, fines, second chances. At one point, my mom actually called me crying, saying, "We don't have enough for rent this month. Can you help us?" I was living off a graduate stipend that barely covered my rent and instant noodles, but I still sent them $200 because I couldn't stand the thought of them being evicted. I didn't even ask where Tyler was in all this. I already knew. Nowhere helpful. The guilt trip was relentless. Every conversation circled back to "family sticks together." My mom weaponized that phrase like it was scripture. And every time, I thought, where was that energy when you sold my laptop? When you gutted my college fund? When you humiliated me at Christmas? But I bit my tongue. I told myself if I just focused on building my life, eventually their chaos wouldn't touch me anymore. I met my partner, let's call him Alex, during my second year. He was patient in a way I didn't know how to accept at first. When I told him about my family, he didn't say the usual, "But they're your parents" nonsense. He just nodded and said, "Sounds like you had to parent yourself." That line cracked me open in a way therapy never had. He didn't pity me. He just understood. Alex came from a family that actually liked each other. Sunday dinners, game nights, inside jokes. At first, I felt like an intruder, sitting at his parents' table while they passed food and asked me questions with genuine curiosity. His mom would hug me goodbye like I belonged there. I'd get back to my apartment and cry because it was so foreign, so easy for them, and so impossible with my own family. Tyler, meanwhile, was racking up debts he couldn't pay. He got mixed up with shady people, the kind who don't send polite reminders when you owe them money. My parents called me one night in a panic. They're threatening him. He needs cash fast. I was making slightly more by then, but still barely enough to keep my head above water. I said no. That was the first time I said it. No. My dad's voice dropped into something I'd only heard once or twice before, usually directed at Tyler's screw-ups. Never me. You're cold. You're selfish. You're not the daughter we raised. I almost laughed. Not the daughter you raised? You mean the one you ignored? The one you stripped of every resource so your son could fail upwards? That daughter? I hung up without saying another word. I sat in my car in the campus parking lot, hands gripping the wheels so tight they hurt, and thought, this is it. I'm done. From that point on, every boundary got firmer. I blocked Tyler's number. I stopped answering my parents' guilt-ridden calls. I built a career brick by brick, while they spent theirs bailing him out of one mess after another. The day I got my first real paycheck, I remember holding it and thinking, I did this. No one helped me. No one handed me a fresh start. I clawed my way here alone. And still they tried. My mom would email me long letters, half sweet, half manipulative. "We miss you, honey. Don't you want to see your brother? He's doing better this time, I promise." Then 2 weeks later, Tyler would get arrested again, and the cycle would repeat. It all came to a head when Tyler committed something I can't soften with euphemisms. It wasn't just a DUI or a fight. It was criminal, destructive, and impossible to spin. He dragged my parents into it financially. Big loans, co-signed agreements, money they didn't have. By then, I was married to Alex, working steadily, and on my way to something resembling stability. And suddenly, there were lawyers at my door, my parents' names tied to debts that bled into my life. That was the moment the slow drip of betrayal turned into a flood. The courtroom wasn't just about Tyler. It was about decades of decisions that led us there. It was about every time they told me family comes first, but meant your brother comes first. And as they sat across from me, begging, I realized this wasn't just Tyler's trial. It was mine too. The thing about Tyler is that he never learned limits, because no one ever gave him any. He grew up believing that money would magically appear, problems would dissolve, and someone else, usually me, would pay the price for his screw-ups. So when he crossed the line into something truly serious, I wasn't shocked. Saddened, yes. Angry, of course. But shocked? No. That part of me had burned out years ago. It started with a phone call at 2 a.m. Alex answered because my phone was on silent. He nudged me awake, whispering, "It's your mom. She sounds frantic." Against my better judgment, I picked up. My mom's voice was jagged, like she'd been crying for hours. "Honey, please, you have to help us. Tyler's in trouble. It's really bad this time." I didn't want to ask, but the silence stretched. "What did he do?" Her sob cracked through the line. There was an accident. He hit someone. With his car." My stomach sank. "Drunk." She didn't answer, which was answer enough. The victim survived, but was hospitalized, badly injured. Tyler was looking at felony charges, DUI with injury, reckless endangerment, the works. My parents had already emptied their accounts paying off his earlier messes, so this time they got creative. They'd taken out loans in their names. And not small ones. Tens of thousands of dollars, co-signed with shady lenders. The kind who show up on your doorstep if you miss a payment. When I found out, it was through a lawyer's letter. My name wasn't on any of the paperwork, but my parents were circling bankruptcy. And when bankruptcy looms, creditors get nasty. It was the kind of legal mess that bleeds into family whether you like it or not. I sat in that lawyer's office with a folder full of documents, each one stamped with my parents' signatures, each one tied to Tyler's recklessness. The lawyer leaned back, fingers steepled, and said, "You need to understand something. If your parents don't deal with this properly, they could lose their house, their pensions, everything." I stared at the folder. I thought about my college fund, my laptop, every dime they'd ever funneled into saving Tyler while I scraped by. And now they wanted me to bail them out again. This time with my career, my marriage, my future on the line. No, the word burned in my chest. Alex was the one who said it out loud, calm and steady. "We're not paying a dime." It wasn't easy after that. My parents called every day, leaving voicemails that swung between pleading and venomous. "He's your brother. How can you be so cold?" Then the next day, "If you don't help, you're dead to us." Back and forth, a pendulum of manipulation. But I didn't budge. For the first time in my life, I didn't flinch. The state pressed charges against Tyler. My parents, desperate to shield him, hired a lawyer they couldn't afford, doubling down on the loans. That's when things turned ugly. Tyler, in his infinite arrogance, tried to drag me into it. He told the court I had benefited from some of the money, that my parents had supported me too. Lies, straight up lies, but enough to get my name tangled in the paperwork. So, I hired my own lawyer. And that's how I found myself on the opposite side of my own family in a courtroom. Walking into that courtroom the first day was surreal. Tyler sat there in a suit that didn't fit, smirking like the whole thing was a joke. My parents sat behind him, clutching each other's hands, eyes red. And me? I sat across the aisle, with Alex at my side and a lawyer who didn't flinch when my dad glared at me like I was the traitor. I wish I could say I didn't feel anything, but that would be a lie. My stomach churned, my chest tight. For all their cruelty, they were still my parents. And some pathetic part of me still wanted them to look at me with love, not contempt. But every time I felt that pang, I reminded myself of the years, decades, of choices that led here. The trial wasn't about me, not technically. It was about Tyler's charges, the financial wreckage, and whether my parents had knowingly committed fraud with those loans. But because Tyler had tried to smear me, I had to testify. My lawyer asked simple questions. Did you receive any financial benefit from these loans? Did your parents ever use this money to support your education or career? No, I said, voice steady even though my hands trembled under the table. In fact, they emptied my college fund to buy him a car after he crashed his first one drunk. They sold my laptop to pay his bail. Every resource went to him. I built my life without their help. The courtroom was silent. Tyler shifted uncomfortably. My parents stared at me like I'd just spat in their faces. But I didn't stop. I laid it all out. The years of favoritism, the sacrifices I was forced to make, the way they excused every one of his failures while dismissing every one of my achievements. It wasn't bitterness. It was fact. By the time I stepped down, I felt both lighter and heavier. Lighter because the truth was finally spoken aloud, where they couldn't deny it. Heavier because I saw, in their faces, that they would never forgive me for it. The judge didn't care about family dynamics, only facts. Tyler was found guilty on multiple counts. My parents were held liable for the fraudulent loans. Their financial world collapsed in a matter of weeks. And that's how we ended up at that final confrontation. Me across from them, their voices breaking, my mom's hands clasped like she was praying. Please, don't take everything from us. But here's the thing, I hadn't taken anything. They had given it all away, to him, over and over, until there was nothing left. And for once, it wasn't my job to save them. After the verdict, the courtroom emptied slowly, like people leaving a funeral. Tyler stormed out first, slamming the door so hard the judge's clerk flinched. My parents lingered, whispering frantically to each other, their faces pale like they'd just woken up in someone else's nightmare. I didn't move. Alex squeezed my hand under the table, silently asking if I was okay. I wasn't, but I nodded anyway. My mom turned back once before leaving, eyes wet and desperate. For a second, I saw something in her face, shame, maybe, or the faint recognition that I hadn't been lying. But then she hardened, like she always did, and shook her head. To her, I wasn't her daughter anymore. I was the enemy. The days after the trial were quiet in a way I hadn't experienced in years. No more calls at 2 a.m. No guilt-tripping voicemails. No emails demanding money. For the first time in my adult life, the chaos wasn't bleeding into my world. It was unsettling, like standing in a room after the storm has passed and realizing you survived it. Of course, news traveled fast in our hometown. People whispered, "Did you hear? Their son's in prison." But somehow, the narrative twisted. I was painted as the cold daughter who abandoned her family when they needed her most. Old neighbors sent me messages on Facebook. "Family's everything, sweetie. Don't turn your back." As if they'd lived my life, eaten the bitterness I'd been force-fed for decades. I didn't respond. Tyler ended up with a prison sentence. Not long enough, in my opinion, but long enough to strip away the last of his arrogance. He wrote me once, a letter full of excuses. I didn't mean for things to get so bad. You know, Mom and Dad always favored me. I never asked for that. As if acknowledging it now would erase years of him rubbing it in my face. He ended with, "When I get out, maybe we can rebuild. You're all I have left." I tore the letter in half and threw it away. He wasn't all I had. I had Alex. I had a career I built brick by brick. I had friends who showed up for me when my own blood didn't. Tyler was just another closed chapter. My parents, though, they were harder to ignore. They lost their house within months. The loans, the legal fees, the court penalties, it gutted them. They moved into a cramped apartment across town, a far cry from the suburban home they once bragged about. My mom still tried, every now and then, to reel me back in. She'd call from a blocked number and leave voicemails like, "We're struggling, honey. You can't turn your back forever." Or worse, "Your father's not well. Don't you care?" And I did care, in some twisted corner of my heart. But I also remembered the countless times they didn't care about me. When they shrugged off my future to buy Tyler a new car. When they called me difficult in front of relatives. When they dismissed my achievements as luck or diversity handouts. Caring about them didn't erase the truth. They had made their choices. And now they were living with them. Alex and I built a life together that felt like mine for the first time. We bought a small house. Nothing flashy. Just a 2-bedroom with a backyard where I planted flowers like I'd always wanted. His family welcomed me like I was one of their own. Thanksgiving dinners with his parents felt surreal. No passive-aggressive comments. No backhanded compliments. No constant comparison to a golden child. Just warmth, laughter, and too much food. Sometimes I'd sit at that table, fork paused halfway to my mouth, and think, so this is what it feels like. To belong. to be wanted without conditions. It was bittersweet because it showed me what I'd been missing my whole life. But it also healed something in me, slowly, meal by meal. My parents didn't stop trying. One Christmas, they showed up at my door unannounced. I opened it to find them standing there, holding a tin of cookies like a peace offering. My mom's smile was brittle, my dad's eyes wary. "We just wanted to see you," she said. For a moment, I considered letting them in. Old instincts tugged at me. Be polite, be the bigger person, give them another chance. But then I remembered Alex's face the first time they sneered at him. I remembered the way my mom laughed when I got into grad school. I remembered the weight of every sacrifice they demanded of me while handing Tyler everything on a silver platter. So I said no. You don't get to walk back in like nothing happened. And I shut the door. I stood there shaking, adrenaline buzzing in my veins, cookies untouched on the porch. Alex wrapped his arms around me from behind, murmuring, "You did the right thing." And for once, I believed him. The years rolled on. Tyler stayed behind bars. My parents faded further into the background, their attempts to reel me in less frequent as time passed. Every now and then, I'd hear through the grapevine that they were struggling, that they were bitter, that they blamed me for ruining the family. But I didn't bite. Their ruin wasn't my doing. It was theirs, built on years of favoritism, lies, and neglect. And yet, even with all that distance, I couldn't shake one final memory. That day in court, when my mom's voice broke as she pleaded, "Please, don't take everything from us." What she never understood was that they had already taken everything from me, my savings, my tools, my dignity, my sense of belonging, long before I ever set foot in that courtroom. All I did was stop giving. And that, it turned out, was the one thing they couldn't forgive. Time is strange. It doesn't heal all wounds, but it does put distance between you and the people who caused them. After the court case, after shutting that door on my parents, I expected the guilt to crush me. Instead, it slowly loosened its grip. Some mornings I'd still wake up with that old instinct. Call mom, check in, fix things. But then I'd remember, I wasn't the fixer anymore. I didn't know them anything. Alex and I built a life piece by piece. I finished grad school, got a job that actually paid enough to breathe, and for the first time in my life, I had stability. Real stability. I wasn't scrambling to cover rent or skipping meals to make a loan payment. I wasn't sacrificing my future so someone else could screw theirs up. The first big milestone was buying a house. Nothing fancy, just a modest two-story with a creaky porch and a yard that needed more love than I had time for. But it was ours. I remember standing in the empty living room on move-in day, sunlight spilling across the floorboards, and crying so hard I scared Alex. He thought something was wrong. I just kept shaking my head, unable to explain that this house was proof that I'd broken the cycle. We filled that house with things my childhood home never had. Peace, laughter, inside jokes that didn't cut like knives. When friends visited, they'd comment on how warm it felt. I didn't tell them the truth. Warmth wasn't an accident. It was deliberate. Every choice I made was the opposite of the house I grew up in. Alex's family became mine. His mom would drop by with casseroles. His dad taught me how to fix a leaky faucet without panicking. They celebrated my promotions, showed up at my graduations, even threw me a surprise party when I published my first paper. They treated me like I'd been theirs all along, no strings attached. It was overwhelming at first, like standing in the sun after years underground. But slowly, I let myself believe it was real. Meanwhile, my parents stayed in that cramped apartment across town. I never went back, but I'd hear things through distant relatives or old neighbors. They were bitter. My mom told anyone who'd listen that I had abandoned them, that I was heartless. My dad claimed I'd exaggerated everything in court, painted them as villains to make myself look better. Tyler stayed in prison, still trying to charm his way through life with that same smirk that had gotten him out of trouble 1,000 times before. I didn't answer his letters. Sometimes I'd wonder what would happen when my parents died. Would I feel relief? Regret? Would I even go to the funeral? I still don't know the answer. What I do know is that grief is complicated when you're mourning people who were alive the whole time you needed them and chose not to show up. Years later, my parents tried one final stunt. They sent a letter, not handwritten, but typed, like it was official. It wasn't an apology. It was a demand disguised as sentiment. We're getting older. Don't you think it's time to put the past behind us? We don't have anyone else. I read it once, folded it neatly, and tucked it into a drawer. Not because I planned to respond, but because I wanted the reminder. Not every story ends with reconciliation. Sometimes the healthiest thing you can do is let the door stay closed. My life now isn't perfect, but it's mine. I mentor students who remind me of younger me. Kids with potential, but no support at home. I tell them what no one told me. You don't have to earn love by being useful, and you don't have to set yourself on fire to keep other people warm. Some of them cry when I say that. I don't blame them. I would have cried too if I'd heard it at 17. Alex and I built traditions of our own. Sunday pancakes, Friday night movie marathons, vacations where no one yells in the car, holidays that aren't battlegrounds. We even host Christmas now, inviting friends who don't have anywhere else to go. It's chaotic and loud and messy, but no one calls anyone difficult. No one disappears from the photos. Sometimes, late at night, I'll think back to that courtroom, my mom's voice echoing, "Please, don't take everything from us." And I'll remember sitting there, realizing they'd already taken everything from me years before. The car, the laptop, the savings, the dignity, the belonging. What they never realized is that once you strip someone of everything, you can't be surprised when they stop giving. I don't hate them anymore. Hate takes too much energy, and I've given them enough of my life already. What I feel now is something quieter. Not forgiveness. Not yet, maybe not ever, but peace. Peace in knowing I got out. Peace in knowing I built something better. Peace in realizing that family isn't about blood, it's about choice. And when I sit at my own kitchen table, surrounded by people who love me, I think about the girl I used to be. The one who stood in a hallway listening to her parents drain her college fund for her brother's fresh start. The one who had her laptop sold for bail money. The one who was told she was difficult, unlovable, second best. I wish I could reach back and tell her, "You'll survive." Not because they said so, but because you're stronger than they'll ever admit. One day, you'll stop surviving and start living. And when they beg you not to take everything from them, you'll finally realize you never owed them anything to begin with.